Miss Erin here from the Big Garden, and I'm here today to talk to you about something called decomposition. First, what is decomposition? It's a big word, but basically it just means that something living, like this apple, or something that was once living, like a leaf, or maybe a dead bug, it's when it breaks down and rots, and it breaks down into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces until it actually turns into soil. Who does decomposition though? Does it just happen? No, there's actually a lot of organisms that participate in decomposition. There's both microorganisms and macroorganisms. Organism is just a big word for something that's alive. So my cat is an organism. I'm an organism. The grass is an organism. Flowers are organisms. This apple came from an organism, an apple tree. And micro means really small. So microorganisms are organisms that we can't even see with our eyes. There's two main microorganisms that participate in decomposition. There's bacteria and fungus. You maybe have heard of bacteria before because sometimes they cause us to get sick. But really, bacteria exist everywhere, and they do all sorts of good things for our bodies and for nature, like decomposition. There's also fungus. Sometimes you see these when they produce something called fruiting bodies. That is another word for mushrooms. But usually, fungus are so small that you can't see them with your eyes. And these bacteria and these fungus are the primary organisms that are responsible for decomposition. There's also a lot of macroorganisms that participate in decomposition though. I went and dug in my garden for a little bit and to try to find some of these macroorganisms. Macro, by the way, means big, so these are organisms that you can see with your eye. I'm a macroorganism, for instance. If you go dig in your garden though, you might find worms. They participate in decomposition. I found a worm today. I didn't find the rest of these, but you might also find in your garden some beetles, some flies, some centipedes, ants. You might even find bees. Some bees and wasps live underground. All of these macroorganisms participate in decomposition, in breaking down this apple into soil. Did you know that you can make things decompose at home? I don't just mean like leaving this on the counter and waiting for the bacteria to make it rot. You can make it happen faster. And today I'm going to show you how you can do that by making a worm bin. What you'll need is a bin. I chose a blue bin today with a lid. You'll need a drill, or if you don't have a drill at home, you'll need a hammer and nail. You'll need some newspaper, you'll need worms, you'll need water, and you'll need food for the worms. First, make sure that you have an adult at home doing this project with you, since we are using tools. And you have to make sure you get your worms. And if you're in Omaha, you can find red wiggler worms. We don't want worms from the garden, we want red wiggler worms, and you can get those at Paradigm Garden. You can also order them online, but they do sell them here in town at Paradigm Garden. First thing you need to do once you gather all your supplies is you need to drill some air holes in the bin. That's why we have a drill today. It's super easy with a drill. You just make sure the bit is running in the right direction and just quickly drill about 6 to 10 holes toward the top of the bin, not the bottom, but the top, near where the lid goes. And if you don't have a drill, I was able to put some holes in my bin as well with a nail and hammer. I just used the hammer to nail to send the nail through the top of the bin and then removed the nail when I was done, and it left a hole. So I put about 10 holes in my bin, and then it's time to fill the bin up with newspaper. I kind of envision this as building a nest for the worms that you're going to put into the bin in just a little bit. And you can take some newspaper and send it through a shredder if you have one of those at home, or just use your hands and shred the newspaper with your fingers until you have a nice, cozy nest of newspaper for the worms to go in. Next, it's time for the worms to go in. They'll be a little bit wriggly and wet, which is good. I just took mine out of the fridge before putting them in here, and that's where you're supposed to keep them until it's time to go into the bin. But I just threw the worms in, and then it was time to water them. That's why I keep a spray bottle next to my worm bin. And then it was time to feed them. And today I fed them some bananas, and then some Brussels sprouts, and a few other things. You'll need to feed them regularly. You'll need to check on them every day and water them with the spray bottle. They like to stay nice and moist. And then you need to feed them. And you feed them maybe once a week, depending on how much food you're giving them. You can basically feed them anything that comes from a plant, with a few exceptions. So you can feed them weeds and grass and things from outside. You can feed them raw vegetables like Brussels sprouts, raw fruits like apples. You can feed them nuts and grains like almonds or pasta that hasn't been cooked. You can feed them fungi like mushroom. And you can feed them things that were made from plants like paper and newspaper. You can't feed them things that didn't come from plants. So things like glass, which comes from sand, or plastic, which is made from oil. Styrofoam is also made from oil, and things like metal, which is a mineral or a rock. You cannot feed those to worms because they actually don't decompose. They don't break down into soil because they were never living. There are a few things that were living that we don't want to feed to worms just because they can't break them down fast enough, and it'll cause your worm bin to smell. So those things are citrus fruits like lemons, limes, and oranges. Any cooked foods, you shouldn't feed them. And anything that comes from an animal. So meat and dairy, cheese, yogurt, milk. Let's make sure not to feed any of those things to them. But the general rules again are make sure you water your worms every day, and make sure you're feeding things that came from plants to your worms. It's kind of fun to have worms at home and to watch them break down things like the bananas and the nuts I fed them today into soil. Once they've created a lot of soil, and they will over time, you can harvest the worms out of the bin and feed that soil to your garden, that compost to your garden. So I'm going to challenge you today to talk to your parents, see if they're down for having some worms in the kitchen that you can keep fed and watered on a regular basis, and get out there and start composting.